What do you do on Sundays?
We talk about Cate Blanchett, the acting, the costumes, the awards, but mostly the Blanchett of it all.
Oh, I'm not acting.
You think this is a love affair?
I saw you, Erica. Meeting in the middle.
This is Sundays with Cate, and I'm your host, Murtada El Fadl. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Sundays with Cate. This is your host, Murtada El Fadl, and today we are discussing the 2008 David Fincher film, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which starred Cate alongside Brad Pitt, Taraji P. Henson, Tilda Swinton, and several other people. It's a stacked cast. We'll get to it. But first, let me introduce my partner today, our guest host, writer and critic, Andrew Kendall.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. I really wanted you to come on this particular episode because I remember you really like Benjamin Button.
I do. One of the few people. I mean, it's one of those weird movies where I don't think people hate it, but it's not remembered very fondly.
No, it's kind of really forgotten in the culture. I think people who remember it for things like that's what I remember it for, just how great Cate and Brad look together in those scenes where they're meeting in the middle.
Or it's one of those movies that got a ton of Oscar nominations and then sort of choked at the end because it was like sort of like this big front runner, and then nothing really happened at the end. Almost oddly like The Aviator.
Yeah, The Aviator
Another
won,
Cate movie.
Yeah, The Aviator won more Oscars than Benjamin Button.
Yeah, but nothing
yes.
major though.
Well, Cate is pretty major, Andrew. She won.
Oh yeah, that's true. But yeah, I mean, not enough major. But I'm getting ahead of myself because Cate does remind me of her Aviator work in this, which I'll get to later on.
Okay, cool. I'm excited to hear that. Before we dig into, let's just set up the movie. So the movie is based on an F. Scott Fitzgerald story. It tells the story of Benjamin Button, who's a man born right at the end of the First World War in 1919, and he is born very old at the end of his time and starts aging backwards. And so the movie is about this aging backwards and its effect on those around him, which include Taraji P. Henson, who plays his adoptive mother, his father. Once he sees his grotesque older person body, puts him outside an old people's home that is run by the character played by Taraji P. Henson. There he meets a lot of older people, so he grows up around these older people. One of them is this woman who he befriends, and her granddaughter is just a few years younger than him, so of course she looks like a normal child, and that's Daisy, and that's Cate's character. And then the story takes us throughout basically their whole life. So we see Benjamin growing up or growing younger, and Daisy growing older until they meet in the middle, and until death almost for both of them, because the framing device is very old Cate telling her daughter, played by Julia Ormond, this story. Did I miss anything in this, Andrew, or this covers
No, I
the
think
film?
that's about it. I'm glad you mentioned the framing device, though, because it's an interesting idea, I think, in the film, because, I mean, it's called Benjamin Button, so it's about him, obviously. But the film has this interesting device of framing it through Cate dying and her daughter on her deathbed, who we learn later on is Benjamin's daughter.
Yep.
But even before we learn about him, there's this, I think, very thoughtful sort of rumination on children and their parents. Like, even before we hear Benjamin's name, we have Julia Ormond, like, talking about, wanting to say goodbye to her. And it's weirdly moving in a way. I think the film is sort of just remembered as this sort of like, flashback movie going through the World War I and II. But it has so much more going on than just Brad Pitt looking old and then young in it.
Yeah. And surprisingly, he is a very passive character. He's the one who just basically grows younger, but kind of not a lot happens to him. It's always the people around him who drive the narrative, mainly Daisy, played by Kate, but also,
Yeah.
when he goes and works in a tugboat, and there you meet Jared Harris as this boozy boat captain who likes to party and goes to whorehouses, and he's the one who's like taking Benjamin along with him on these adventures, as opposed to Benjamin having any aptitude to start anything.
One thing I remember really clearly when the movie came out was the discourse around it just being David Fincher's version of Forrest Gump. And rewatching it again, I watched it yesterday, but I saw it coincidentally before you asked me to the podcast 2 weeks ago. And I don't think that's a fair comparison at all, though. Like, I mean, other than being about somebody growing up, it's not really that similar.
Yeah, this one is not concerned with history at all, so it's just about Benjamin. That's one difference. But what other difference did you see?
I think, I mean, that being the main one, and the fact that ultimately I think Benjamin Button is it's such a small story. Ultimately, it's really just about people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really doesn't care about history to that large extent. It's really just about the way that people relate to each other. And when you get to like the very end and it has that closing narration and he talks about the people he's met, and Kate being the last person we see on screen, hat tip to Kate, it's all very much about just like very small human emotions rather than anything significant. It could have been set like anywhere. It didn't have to be set in mid 20th century America. It really could have happened anywhere, other than, of course, the film sort of frames it slightly around the Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah, I mean, the framing device takes place as Katrina is hitting New Orleans, because most of the movie takes place in New Orleans. But to your point, and this is, I think, one of the minuses against the film, I do not really see a distinct sense of place. Like, it tells me this is New Orleans, and I'm sure they shot in New Orleans, but I don't really see or feel New Orleans in the movie. It could have really been set anywhere, and it's not really concerned with place or time at all. It's just concerned with its characters.
Yep. I mean, that's a fair point.
Since we started with the framing device, one of the things that is also taken a minus against this movie, and I could see the minus, is the heavy old age makeup that Kate has to basically live under in the framing device.
I don't mind the makeup because it reminds me of my favorite movie, The English Patient, which is also with Ralph Fiennes in not terrible makeup, but just heavy makeup. She doesn't look like her. But I don't think the makeup is bad. I do think, though, that the makeup is a bit too much, though, because she's not that old when the movie starts. So it's like, I mean, I don't think a woman that it would look that old. They never explain why she's ill, so it just is sort of like, why does she look so terrible?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how old she's supposed to be. She's only a few years younger than Benjamin.
I'm trying to remember when they say she was born. They say it in the movie, but I've forgotten. But she's not that old.
If Katrina, we know when Katrina was, and she, in the story, she says she's 43 when Benjamin is 49, so she's 6 years younger, so that's 1924, 25. So she's not that old. The makeup makes her look 160 years old. So. Yeah, she looks really old. And one thing you mentioned in your notes that's good, though, is Kate's old voice is really good. Yeah, people got so bogged down by the admittedly too much makeup job and forgot the expert voice work of Cate Blanchett as old Daisy, because she is able to do not just a perfect, impeccable accent. All her accent work is always perfect, but also that old lilt, and you hear her, you know she's from New Orleans, and you know she's very old. So that that's acting.
I think you were talking about it in the episode with Jose, talking about Kate's voice acting, and I was thinking so much about her voice in this particular film also. because I mean, she really is an excellent voice actor.
Yep.
Like you think of like her work in Lord of the Rings or her work in The Aviator or Blue Jasmine, like the way that she says things are so very evocative. And in the film also, like there's this, even young Daisy, old Daisy, older Daisy, that there's that journey she's taking you on, not just with the makeup and with how she looks, but how she sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And like how her emotions are, reticent or open or earnest. It's really good work she's doing here, which makes me always annoyed at how I think it's so easy to dismiss the performance as just, she's playing the romantic interest, but it's
Yeah.
such good work.
Yeah, and you're right. She just chart the whole story through her voice because there is makeup when she plays very young ballerina Daisy. Basically, they take away her wrinkles when she plays Daisy in her 20s and a scrubbed face,
Yeah.
but also the voice work there. It's her voice. She's playing a young ingenue, and you can feel the excitement of a young person. And then as she grows older, she keeps doing it. So it I think it's maybe the biggest showcase ever for her voice work, just because she had to play a person from like 20 to I don't know 90, something like that. Heavily made up as an old person, and her face is scrubbed as a young person with the technology that Fincher employs in this movie. But the voice is all Blanchett's work.
I was thinking, because in your notes you were talking about the fact that this is, beside Lord of the Rings trilogy, probably her biggest box office hit.
Mm-hmm.
And like, what would somebody who didn't know Kate think if they saw her from this movie? And I was thinking a lot of what's. I was trying to place it in her filmography, and I was thinking that this performance reminds me most of her work as Meredith Logue in Ripley. In the When I think of Cate Blanchett, I don't think of her as like an ingenue or as a romantic interest, because she's always. I mean, I love her, but there's the idea that she's this cerebral person,
Mm-hmm.
and so we think of her as like Galadriel, ethereal and like beyond human, or even Jasmine or Catherine Hepburn. They're not exactly like regular everyday human beings. There's something a little bit celestial about them. But
Yes.
like with Daisy and like with Merida, they're just regular girls, women going through life. And she is able to do that in a way I don't think people give her credit for. It's almost too easy in a way, because like, oh, Kate Blanchett playing a love interest in the movie, like that's not much considering, I mean, this is like the year after she's done Bob Dylan and Queen Elizabeth. Like, it seems like a step down a bit in terms of the role, but and I think that's maybe one of the reasons her work wasn't as celebrated.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like if it was another actress who was not like really famous, it would have been like a role for them.
Yeah.
Like, the degree of difficulty seems less, but I think it's not really.
I agree with you. I think she's not given enough credit for the degree of difficulty of this part, because this part is not easy. Actually, Daisy has to do a lot more than Benjamin. Benjamin just has to grow younger. Daisy goes through a lot, and things happen more to her. But
Yeah.
because Cate Blanchett is Cate Blanchett, and she has played so many other bigger, better, more difficult parts, so this part is not given its due because it's played by her. And I do want to dig a little deeper into sort of like, does this movie reflect her screen persona? There is some of her screen persona is here if you think of the glamour of Blue Jasmine at the
Yeah.
beginning anyway, or the glamour of Carol. Even Elizabeth is glamorous. Daisy is definitely a glamorous ballerina, so that part is there. But perhaps that's the only part that's reflected, because usually, to your point, she plays more cerebral characters, and Daisy,
It's very flighty.
yes.
she is. She is. But like, I mean, not even in a bad way though. I feel like the film is one of the reasons I like this movie so much is I find it very empathetic,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the reason it's my favorite Fincher movie, which is maybe mildly controversial. Like, I mean, you don't think of Fincher as somebody you go to for empathy. He has other good qualities,
Yeah.
and one thing I think works for the film, even when it's very discursive, which is very often, is that it's sort of like a director wrestling with his desire for empathy, but also his inclination towards remoteness. Because the movie is also sometimes very remote. It's not sentimental in the way you think of something being warm and sentimental, but it's empathetic and cold like at the same time. There's this distance that you mentioned, like the fact that Benjamin is a very passive character, so it's like he is almost like on the outside looking in at these people living life normally. And then the film is doing all of these things with empathy. So by the end of the film, when he turns into a child and Daisy has that final scene with him when she's much older, I feel like it's like he's finally understood maybe how to see people to get in, sort of, in a way.
Yeah.
So I find the ways that, like, Daisy, like at first she's sort of intrigued by him in a sort of morbid way, and then she grows to understand him a bit more. I think Cate does a really good job, and Fincher helps her, of course, in not sort of sanitizing her less savory qualities, and his also. We were talking about Cate here. Like, she can be a bit flighty and a bit judgmental, but you sort of get it because Benjamin is also kind of dull sometimes.
Yeah, he is. And that's sort of why she was not that into him at the beginning, because her life was just much more exciting than this old dude. But when you were talking about the later part of the movie, when Benjamin is much younger than her, and he starts coming back into her life, those are my favorite parts of Cate's performance in this movie. I think she gives them gravitas, and she gives Daisy warmth that she didn't have in the part where she was flighty, and
Yeah.
that sort of warmth is a very good way for her to chart the growth of this character, of this woman, from that flighty ballerina to this mother and older person who knows more than Benjamin, because she's been through more life than Benjamin, even though
Yeah.
he is growing younger, but she's been through more life and more experiences, and that's my favorite part of the performance.
That's true. That's definitely true. Like, whenever I watch this movie, I like I said, it is my favorite Fincher movie, and like I can recognize all the things that don't really sort of work in theory, but then I watch it, and then it comes to that scene in the nursing home when he has dementia, but he's a child, and he can't remember her, and it's not even the incident; it's how Kate plays it,
Yeah.
and like I think I mentioned earlier that it reminds, like, in addition to Meredith Logue, it reminds me of her as Katharine Hepburn, because I can see Katharine Hepburn playing that character, the older Daisy, who's,
Yeah.
very maternal and warm, but still very direct. It's really very much this sort of weird trick she's playing, because I think one thing persons who don't like the movie are kind of right about is that it's a weird dynamic, the backward aging thing. So, like, he looks like an old person and she's a child in one of the early scenes when Elle Fanning plays Daisy.
Yeah.
And it's obviously visually creepy. Her grandmother is
very
like,
creepy.
yeah, it's very creepy. And then in the end, she's an old woman and he's a boy who's no longer Brad Pitt, and it's like, this is also creepy. And she needs to sell the fact that, Benjamin is both a lover and also in some ways like her child now. And it's a very delicate balance she's threading there, which I think she ends up achieving.
She does. And to your point, those scenes with her are much less creepy because of the performance. And I think I want to quote A.O. Scott in the New York Times, who I think gets at what we were talking about here. And he says, and I quote, "But the movie's emotional center of gravity, the character who struggles and changes and feels, is Daisy, played by Miss Blanchett, from impetuous ingenue to near ghost, with an almost otherworldly mixture of hauteur and heat."
So, because the movie is not that long, it's 2 hours 40, but Daisy doesn't really appear properly until 1:20 or something.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the first half Taraji, as Queenie is the emotional center.
Yeah.
And then when Taraji leaves the movie, Daisy ends up sort of taking the reins. There's a bit in
Yeah.
the center where neither Taraji or Daisy is there, which I guess we'll talk about shortly.
Yeah.
But it's really just sort of that two-hand balancing act. And maybe, I mean, another reason why persons were sort of reticent to like award it is because they weren't sure where to place it. I mean,
Yeah.
she's obviously the leading actress, but she's not on screen that much.
She's not. And if we want to talk about, I think this is a good time to talk about sort of why she wasn't awarded, even though the movie was an awards magnet. And the year, at least for Oscars, it got the most nominations of any
Yeah,
movie
she
that
didn't even
year.
get a Golden Globe nomination. And I remember at the time thinking, like, what the hell? Like, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially considering that she'd come off of this, like, awards hungry run from like 2003 when she got Golden Globe nomination for Missing, of all things, which I like though. Missing is a good movie and she's very good in it. So
Yeah.
there's Missing, there's Aviator, there's No Sign of Scandal, there's I'm Not There, there's The Golden Age, and then this movie comes a huge hit and like nothing.
Yeah, the people were just like, no. And I think one reason is that, which we talked about, is that she's playing the girl, right? Like people
Yeah.
are not seeing the complexity of this part. And the other thing is what you just said, which is she's absent for long stretches of time. Like she doesn't really come
Yeah.
in until an hour and a half into a 2 hour 45 movie, really. And then I think the biggest thing is just the old age makeup. People I think were really turned
That's
off
fair.
by that.
That's fair. I mean, they're wrong, but it's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, other than the makeup just being not for her age, like it's not bad makeup. It's
Yeah.
just too much makeup.
It's too much, yeah. And
But I like those scenes. Like the makeup doesn't bother me because I like those scenes with her and her daughter, and also like there's I think a lot about the persons of color in the movie because of course it's in New Orleans, so of course there are black people around, and the film sort of tries to involve them. So like if you notice, all of the nurses in the scenes where she's on her deathbed are black women, and then of course Queenie is there, who's sort of like the nurse caretaker for
Yeah.
Benjamin.
yeah.
And there's this, it's like, I mean, the scenes work. It's not like, you know, the makeup is distracting you from the empathy going on there. So I'm like, I mean, just watch the movie, people.
Yeah. And I really, I'm glad you brought Taraji up as Queenie because I really love her, and she gives a very warm performance. Like
She is really good in this movie,
she's
and
so great.
I mean, I've been a Taraji fan like since she was in Baby Boy with Tyrese. Like, I mean, I have struggled with this woman from the bit part in Something New and like all of those movies nobody on mainstream film critics watch.
Yeah.
And she's great. And I think this was her breakthrough ultimately, I guess, for like white Hollywood, ultimately.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a good
That's-
showcase.
That's a good distinction for white Hollywood. Absolutely.
It is. And I mean, like, I think a lot of, like, I've mentioned thinking of the persons of color in the movie and how they're treated. And I think there's that scene that I always remember where, spoiler alert, Queenie dies and they go to her funeral, Daisy and Benjamin, and everyone in the church is black and they're all weeping. And Daisy and Benjamin are there and they just don't know how to react emotionally.
Yeah, they're stone
And
faced.
I think about that scene a lot. Like, I mean, like what is Fincher telling us here? Like, how are we supposed to respond to this? And I think coming back to my previous point, it's to the idea that for a lot of the film, both Daisy and Benjamin just don't know how to express emotion really well. They're like, I mean, Daisy is still sort of mourning her dance career at that point, and Benjamin is still not sure where he fits in as an old-looking young person, or vice versa. And from the very first scene of the movie, I mean, I think Taraji sort of injects some necessary light in it. Like, she's there on the porch with Mahershala, and they're talking about their flirtation. And it's one thing I like about the movie. It's, like I said, it's very discursive, which isn't for everybody. But one thing I really appreciate is the way that you can sort of imagine each of these characters having their own lives somewhere.
Yeah. And she has
It's very
great
much
chemistry with Mahershala, and you
Yeah.
see the relationship in the interplay. Like the script doesn't give them much to do, but they just exist well together, and you can chart that relationship and get its warmth and its love and everything that's happening between those characters just from how they exist in front of the camera together.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing I'd say against the movie, even though I love it, is that with all of these great women in them, like, there's no Kate Taraji scene, there's no Kate Tilda scene. And
Yeah.
I remember before the movie came out, like, of course, this is on the heels of Tilda winning the Oscar over Kate for Michael Clayton. I'm thinking, oh, we'll see Kate and Tilda in a movie. Nothing. Literally, they never meet.
There is literally 2 seconds of Kate and Taraji together where Queenie is serving them lunch or dinner or something,
and she's being sort of snide to Daisy because Daisy sort of broke Benjamin's heart.
Yeah.
Which I think suggests that there probably are scenes on the cutting floor we just didn't see.
Yeah, probably.
Which, I mean, it's a long movie, so fair.
Yeah. But one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is that Taraji is great. She's very warm and we love her. But is this character itself a modern version of the Mammy archetype? Because it is, right? It is. She is a caretaker. And while we do get her relationship with her man, played by Mahershala Ali, and the feelings she has for Benjamin, her part is just there so that she takes care of Benjamin, and most of her scenes are just her asking him how he's doing and being a caretaker and nothing more.
I do think about that, and I mean, there's always that potential with black female characters in films that are mostly white. And one thing I think that makes me sort of resist it, and I mean, I think it might be the direction in the movie more than the script itself, which, as you said, sometimes I feel like the actors add shades to the script that aren't really there. But like I keep thinking of that first scene where she's introduced, and like the movie has an idea of Queenie beyond Benjamin, which I appreciate. So like when, I mean, those who haven't seen the movie, and like, why haven't you? So Benjamin's dad like just drops him on the floor there of the nursing home, just leaves him, and Queenie and her husband, Mr. Withers, is it, are having this conversation, and he's just an afterthought. Like you feel this like ebullient from this woman just flirting with this guy she kind of likes, and like I feel like the movie recognizes her as a person beyond him, even though we don't see a lot of it. So like, for example, when they go to church later on and she's praying for a child that eventually comes, like, it's not the text of the film, but I feel like the film at least has an understanding of her as a person beyond this role, rather than just, her being there to exist for him.
Yeah.
But I feel, I mean, your criticisms are fair, though. I mean, but I think also, does it mean anything? Like, why was it that his surrogate mother was a black woman? I thought about that when I first saw the movie in 2008. Like, was there something he was trying to say about, blackness in New Orleans, or like something about his father as a white person not being open to, deformity, whereas Queenie as a black woman who was childless of that time was clearly more empathetic. Who was in charge of this nursing home?
It's very vague, right? It seems like Queenie is, but she wouldn't. She wouldn't be.
So that
doesn't make sense. Which is why I'm not sure that the movie is actually commenting about race at all. It all seems just haphazard and coincidences.
It's very much a fantasy.
And then the other thing is that I think, Taraji got an Oscar nomination for this movie, and this is the part...
Her first. I'll keep saying her first because this can be her only one. Cross my fingers.
But this is the type of part that black actors get awards for. Just for all the things that we were just talking about. We haven't talked about the technology, which I guess at the time of this movie release, that de-aging thing was
a big deal.
It was a big deal.
A big deal. I think everybody around the world collectively gasped at that scene where young Brad Pitt shows up looking like Thelma and Louise Brad Pitt at Kate's door, and she gasped and we gasped, and it's like, wow.
Yeah, but I have to say it's one of the best, even though it was the first or one of the
Yeah,
first to use it. It's
it's a
still,
very good-looking movie.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've seen The Irishman, but I'll tell you, Brad
I
Pitt
haven't.
looks much better than Robert De Niro does. So there
Well,
you have it.
well, I mean,
But I think this is a plus for Fincher. So we gave him a couple of minuses. So technology, David Fincher, you get a plus.
I just remember through the entire 2008 Oscars being so annoyed that Slumdog Millionaire was winning everything. Like it took me like it I carried that chip on my shoulder because I don't even like Slumdog Millionaire, and like I didn't like Dev Patel until like 3 years ago. So like it was like my nemesis. It was my $1 million baby again. It was like It was like relitigating the Aviator losing, which was
Oh.
the first years that I really focused on the Oscars. So like 4 years later, I'm like Cate Blanchett again in a movie with all of these technical nods and just like losing them left and right. Like, how did this movie lose the Oscar for best costumes?
Yeah, the costumes are very good and to die for. Who? Oh, the Duchess one, right? Yeah.
I think it
Yeah.
also lost for music, which I thought it was definitely gonna win for. I mean, I do like A.R. Rahman's music because of my Bollywood phase when I was younger, but
Yeah.
this is probably my favorite score by Dipla. Probably, maybe.
Yeah, the music is very good. Although I don't know who I was rooting for that year. I think I was rooting for Milk, not for music, but just in general.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair. It's fair.
But I wanted to ask you, since you really like this movie, and the thing that I really could not reconcile with this movie is that this tale of the man who ages backwards, it's sort of a tall tale. It's something that, your grandmother or grandfather will tell you when you were really young and put you, to sleep, telling you this fast story that is
Yeah.
about short story that's also about things that really might not happen, but as a child you accept them. But then the filmmaking and the storytelling is this sort of stately Dr. Zhivago like epic
Yeah,
treatment.
it's not the filmmaking is not fantastical. The filmmaking is very straightforward and realist.
Yeah. So I found that disconnect just, I think that's the main reason why I don't love this movie, is like the story should have been more, the filmmaking should have been as fantastical as the story. And you have actors there who can give you that.
It is true that the film, like I mean, the movie starts before Benjamin with the tale of this guy
Mr.
who,
Gatto, yeah.
yeah, who creates the clock that moves backwards, which is obviously not realistic, and it's the very last shot of the movie.
Yeah.
But the movie isn't done at all with any sort of like overt magic or anything.
Yeah. It's not. I mean, I think there is a disconnect, and I don't know I think he could have done something to this story.
You mentioned in your notes how the movie sort of has his Dr. Zhivago quality. And although I didn't see that particular movie as a predecessor, I do think Benjamin Button is very much like a movie from that time, in that where we see like older actors playing younger selves. Like I mean, obviously Kate is like what? She's I think almost 40 when she does this movie. And she's playing
Yeah.
Daisy at like 23, 24. And like she's obviously not 23, 24.
Yeah.
And even the digitizing doesn't make her look actually 23, 24. But coming back to her first point, she sounds 23, 24, and she acts 23, 24. So in that scene when he goes to her dance thing and she's all very like, what are you doing here? Like, this is very awkward. She captures the essence of it so effectively. Like, when you think of older movies where actors are like in their 40s, like Norma Shearer playing Juliet, for example, in Romeo and Juliet, it's like clearly they're the wrong age, but it's such an old movie thing that works in this, I think. Like, she works, like, I don't think the movie would have worked if they like cast a young actress and then like
Play her.
aged her up.
The part that's important to the story is that we meet when they meet in the middle, and they wanted somebody, I think, who looked as old as Brad or closer to his age at that time. But to your point about Fincher, and you think this is his most empathetic film, and I do agree with that. Do you think this is why this film, because it is so unlike his other movies, that people are, his fans, particularly his bro fans, side eye Benjamin Button? And
I mean, the funny thing is though, like my second favorite Fincher movie is Fight Club, which is like the ultimate bro movie. So
yeah,
like,
totally.
I
love Fight
contain
Club, too.
multitudes. To your question, I think the movie doesn't really make sense in Fincher's filmography, which is why so many resist it. And even like, I mean, I can recognize even as much as I like the movie that the movie doesn't argue for any sort of huge philosophical point. Like it doesn't end with like telling you some great point about like humanity. It's just a movie about people. And I think that going into the movie with the build up for the movie and who was in the movie, who's directing the movie, you're sort of expecting that there is some sort of great aha
Yeah.
thing. Like it's a movie about, I don't know, racism or about people who are disenfranchised or ill or sick. The movie is not about any grand statements. It's just a movie about people.
Yeah.
And I think considering what Fincher does before and after, it's sort of like a huh? Like I don't get it.
I mean, the thing that at the end, sort of like the one lesson I could gather from this movie is when Benjamin says to Daisy, "Nothing lasts," and I'm just like, "Big whoop, Fincher! Everybody knows that."
I figure you were born in 1918, 49 years ago. I'm 43. We are almost the same age. We're meeting in the middle.
We finally caught up with each other.
Wait.
I want to remember us just as we are now.
I also like the fact that it's ultimately just this very small, humble tale of this weird man. Like,
Yeah.
there's nothing more. It's not trying to be more than that. And I think, considering how many movies are sort of reviled for trying to do too much, I respect it for just having some very small intentions. And I mean, like, we need more stories about just regular human to human contact. Like, I mean, maybe this isn't the best example of that. But there's
Because
something
the
I
guy
think
is just
refreshing
so-
in that.
Just crazy. He's not really regular. Like, I get where your point about like it's about just connection between people, but he's such a weird character. Benjamin,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, he's aging backward. Like, I mean, I was mentioning before we started recording that Ebert didn't like this movie, Roger Ebert, and like that
Yeah.
was a central issue. He was like, the movie just the very concept of the movie is terrible. I don't find it that fantastical, but probably because I'd already read the Scott story before I even heard about this movie, so I
Oh.
knew of the short story, which, by the way, is not as good as the movie.
Oh, really?
No, I mean, no offense to F. Scott Fitzgerald, but like it's not his best work.
But if it's a short story, maybe this movie could have been 2 hours. Because I do think there's a part that
Daisy
really-
isn't in it though, at least not properly.
No,
So,
I don't
like,
want to cut any of Daisy's part, but I would cut the tugboat and maybe Tilda. Because that part is just the part where it sags and you spend like half an hour with Jared Harris and Tilda Swinton and you're like, what's going on?
I buy you. I take you on the tugboat. I would not remove Tilda, and I'm not even like the biggest Tilda stan, but I genuinely adore her in this movie.
I mean, she's great, but it's just that part I think just goes on because also she is in the same part as the tugboat. So it's not just her.
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, like how would he reach there if there was no tugboat?
Yeah. So let me ask you about what's your favorite scene in the movie or a scene you liked. We talked about older Daisy. Something that I really like is Daisy's accident. Just the way that the filmmaking in that is superb, and the way Fincher
Yeah.
does that.
Yeah,
just
it is.
clock ticking and sort of the coincidences and going back to tell us what if this had happened, this would not have happened, which also is a thesis that the movie is talking about in the script a little bit, about how everything happens for a reason or everything is fated.
Yeah.
So that's my favorite.
Too
part
soon.
of the film.
Well, I mean, I'll that scene is one of them, but also the scene before that where Daisy and Benjamin go on their first date. And there's something that he does with the script which sort of like emphasizes Daisy's fightiness, where you hear her talking about just like Daisy stuff, and she's talking overhead, but the we're seeing the date in slow motion almost. So it's out of sync, which is sort of the point of the movie, which is that his outside doesn't sync up with his insides.
Yeah.
And then we finally sync up, and she's like, "Oh my god, I'm talking too much," or something like that. And they go for this walk, and she does this dance on the pier or something in that iconic red dress, or I think it's iconic at least. And
Very beautiful.
it's the moment that they're not quite in touch with each other, because she wants to have sex with him, and he's sort of like, "No, I just want to like," well, I don't know what he wants. I mean, he's so opaque, Benjamin,
Yeah,
but
we
he
never
doesn't
know
want to
what
have
he
sex
wants.
with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think she leaves, and she feels a bit hurt, and things are out of sync there. But I really like that scene. Like, it's the best of the movie. The costumes are really good. The cinematography is gorgeous. Kate's voice is what you hear her more than you see her.
Yeah.
And she's there, and she's talking about this idea of the line, which comes up later on when she's at her dance studio.
Yeah.
And it's such a good precursor for later on. Another good scene, which is when she's telling him about meeting in the middle,
Yeah.
when she has her dance studio and whatnot. I mean, the best scenes of the movie are sort of with Kate. Yeah.
Yeah. She is the best part of the movie. Absolutely. And I do like the meeting in the middle part, and that's also very quotable. I have said that to people.
Yes, it is. I mean, that's when you know a movie at least leaves an impression, when you just quote a regular line from it.
Yeah.
I mean, but there are a lot of scenes in the movie that I think about, weirdly enough, I guess, or maybe not weirdly. The scene where he leaves his family, which I always forget happens, because I always try to remember, like, why did he leave? Like, did something happen? Oh yeah, he just like drives off in the night
And then
early one morning. Yeah.
there's a close up on her face as she realizes that
Yeah.
he's left.
And like, I mean, the more I talk about it, the more like I once again realize she's doing so much heavy lifting in that back half.
She is. I mean, I don't think this movie would work without her, but you know.
Yeah. And
But-
I mean, just to answer your question very briefly, though, like when I think of the movie, though, the scene that pops up, the image that pops up, is the scene of Cate Blanchett in the pool, crying when she sees this young girl swimming, and she's remembering the fact that she can't dance anymore. And that image is the one that I think of most often in the movie, which is just her crying and thinking, I'm not gonna be in this like place of grief anymore. I'm gonna open a dance studio.
Yeah.
And it's very emotionally resonant.
And I think she gets a scene like that where Daisy gets to show us that she's growing, that she's realizing, that she's understanding life. And Benjamin never does, which is why it's such an odd part and an odd performance. Like, it's definitely, I like Brad Pitt in general, but this is not one of his finest moments.
I like him I think that Benjamin is very opaque as a character, but I like him in the movie playing Benjamin. And like, to your point, the fact that we see Daisy going on the journey sort of, I think, brings home my previous point that the movie really is sort of more about her than him. I mean, she frames the story. The story ultimately is about Daisy telling her daughter that this is your father.
Yeah.
That is the movie.
Yeah.
The movie isn't really about Benjamin growing up. It's really about Daisy.
It is. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I wanted to ask you about, since we are talking about Brad Pitt, I really want to see her and Brad Pitt to work again together. What would you put them in if you had all the power?
That's a good question. I want to see them in something like Bandits. Like a sort of raunchy sexy, irreverent comedy thing. So like maybe directed by, I don't know, like the Coen brothers in Burn After Reading Mode.
Oh, and that's one of his best performances. He's very funny
Yeah.
in that. And Kate
Or yeah.
should do more comedy. So yeah, I like that.
Like I think you mentioned in the notes about Kate in romance movies, and it's sort of odd that she isn't in more romance movies since her breakthrough was in a romantic movie.
Yeah, I mean she
Oscar and
never.
Lucinda.
Yeah, I mean she has done very few like this. Oscar and Lucinda, Carol. Like I don't think she does a lot of, and I always think that most actors are just maybe not worthy of her, like on film, like not in general, like on film. I think
Yeah,
she
I
is.
know, I know what you mean. I know what you
She's
mean.
cerebral. She's really smart, and sometimes when she's in romantic stories, you're just like, especially like I'm thinking of Joseph Fiennes and Elizabeth. It's just like you're not worthy of this person. He was
Please
a
don't
terrible
shade
guy.
Joseph Fiennes. He deserves so much better than the post Shakespeare career he had. I weep for him.
Okay, well I guess he suffered enough.
But I mean, funnily to your point though, like I mean, if you think of the fact that no one is worthy of her, it makes sense that Bandit is probably her best romance, and she gets two of them.
Yes, because one is not enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
So that's all. Do you need to like off balance how much she is?
So, what is your favorite Kate performance?
I mean, I have to say The Aviator. Like I mean,
Catherine Hepburn.
it's not the first Kate performance that I saw. The first is Lord of the Rings, obviously, but it was the first time I took notice of her. Like, I mean, it's so weird. It was a weird confluence of events because I had just gotten really obsessed with Catherine Hepburn, like, before that movie came out, like, with no knowledge of the Scorsese movie. Like, I just happened to get interested in her because she died just before the movie was finished or something like
yeah,
that.
I remember.
And I love Kate in the movie, even though she's not Catherine Hepburn. It's when I think of Kate, I just think of her in that golf scene with Leonardo DiCaprio talking about showering or something, whatever that line was. Yeah, that's
You're
the Kate
deaf
for
and
me.
I sweat.
She's just great in that movie, especially
great.
because she's not who you think of as, in theory, as a Catherine Hepburn descendant. But then I watch it and I think, of course she is. Like, of course she is. Who else would it be?
So, would you like to see her work with Fincher again, or with anybody else? Who would you like to see her work with?
I want her to work with Scorsese again. I always remember her Oscar speech where she says that she wants her son to marry his daughter.
Yeah.
And like every now and then when I watch this speech back, because I mean, what are we if we don't rewatch Oscar speeches? I think where are those children now? Like, are they in contact? What's happening, kid? I want to know. I want to see her work with Scorsese though, because I love Scorsese and he's my favorite living director. And I want to see her work with Leo again.
Yeah, Scorsese should just call her and Leo right now and put them in a movie together. I would love
but
to
like
see
I
that.
mean, Scorsese hasn't done like a Age of Innocence type of movie in forever. It's like, what could he possibly cast her in?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? Sometimes people surprise you. So we talked about Kate working with Brad, and you wished Kate was in a scene with Tilda. But who is your favorite Kate scene partner?
Two answers. One of them is not really an answer because I keep thinking, like, to the point of her not being in a scene with Tilda, isn't it frustrating that she's not in a scene with Jude Law in Ripley? Because I think they would work really well. I think they'd be great together.
Yes, that is very frustrating, especially since she
Yeah.
keeps thinking Matt Damon
Yeah.
is Dickie Greenleaf.
And I love Jude Law, and I think he and Kate would be really interesting together. Like,
Yeah.
in a movie. I don't want to say that Kate is an ungenerous scene partner, but like she's not somebody I think of as like a dual performer. Like, there's certain actors I think of as like working best with other people, but Kate is good when she doesn't have a scene partner.
Like in
Let me
Jasmine.
explain a bit. Like, I mean, like, coming back to her voice, like when I think of Cate Blanchett, I think of her narrating the beginning of Lord of the Rings. She doesn't need anybody. It's just her.
Yeah.
And even when I think of her in movies I like her in where people are with her, it's her monologuing. Like the scene where we meet her in The Aviator. It's one long monologue.
Yeah, Leo is just there to look at her.
Yeah.
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 But,
She doesn't need anybody.
I will counterpoint with, like, she's great with Dame Judy in Notes on a Scandal, for example.
That's probably her best scene partner indeed. I do very often tell people you're not young. Maybe a question I can ask you before you go, though.
Sure.
Considering we're talking about fashion in the movie, like, what do you think is Kate's best fashion ensemble in the movie?
Well, you mentioned the red dress where she wears on that date
Yeah.
with Benjamin, and that's a great outfit and a great costume. But I also just like her when she goes to the dancers' party after when she was still a dancer. And I think she's wearing
yeah.
like a pencil thin trousers and a top, and she just looks great with the red hair, and it's just, I love that. Well, this has been a pleasure and a joy. Thank you so much for coming on Sundays with Cate. And before you go, do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you online and your work?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter. My handle is Departed Aviator. And
he
you can
was
read my
departed.
reviews on Stabroek News, which is a newspaper in Guyana, where I'm from. It's spelled Stabroek. It's a Dutch word.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And you can find me online at me_says and follow the podcast at Sundays with Cate. And until next time, thank you for listening.